guys, it's Ty with Ty the Dog Guy on the Daily, and I want to talk to you today about dog aggression. Now, one of the questions I get a lot, and a lot of folks are very, even frustrated about this. They even worry that, oh my gosh, I'm sure I've done something wrong. I can't, I feel like such a bad dog owner. And I'm describing, of course, dog owners who have dogs with aggression and have been hearing things from people about where dog aggression comes from. Because there's this weird and strange, I don't know if I want to call it a rumor or myth or whatever, going around that dogs are only aggressive if people have abused them or trained them to be aggressive. And so obviously this is crazy. I shouldn't say obviously because some people don't know this, but it is crazy. It's crazy to think that, because aggression comes from so many different places. At its root, the majority of aggression that I see comes from fear, insecurity, anxiety. So when a dog is presented with something that makes that dog feel fear, anxiety, insecurity, things like that, really the dog has three options available to him or her. Those options, and there's different sliding scales, and so there's much more intricacies of what I'm talking about, but let me kind of give just generalities here. Pick up my leash. But those three things are fight, flight, and avoidance. Now, a lot of people are familiar with fight and flight. If you watch National Geographic for a little bit, you'll hear the commentator talk about fight and flight and all that good stuff. And dogs definitely have fight and flight. But another thing that dogs have, people have as well, is avoidance. And so in any case, a lot of folks get confused because they say, well, I don't understand. My dog couldn't be afraid because he runs up to dogs and attacks them, or he runs up to people and attacks them. If he was afraid, he wouldn't do that. Not so. That for a lot of dogs, that is their coping mechanism for fear, because they've realized that, hey, if I am feeling stressed, if I'm feeling these things, if I show aggression, I just might win. And so if I'm the first guy, out there, throwing a punch, then I might win. And like I say, if you look at it through the eyes of us people do this all the time. There's plenty of people that are insecure who are constantly starting fights and starting ruckus, and it's because of their fear and their insecurity that they do it. And I'm talking about physical fights, mental fights, emotional fights, things like that. It's common that when stress is there, when anxiety is there, that people, dogs, that we may choose fight. Now, flight obviously is running away, and avoidance is looking away from something and pretending it's not there. But the fight response tends to manifest itself with growling, barking, lunging, biting, attacking. And so like I say, that insecurity, that fear is what causes most of it. Now, there's other things that can cause aggression. Many of them are even related to fear or insecurity. So, for example, resource guarding. Resource guarding is a dog who says, I've got food, don't come near my food, and because if you do, I'm going to bite you. And so at its root, you're going to see some fear and insecurity, I might lose I might lose my resource, I might lose my food or my toy or whatever. And so fear of loss is at its root. It's a different kind of fear than fear of physical harm, for example. But fear of loss, is at the root of most resource guarding. And there's a million types of aggression that we could, well, not a million, I'm exaggerating. But there's a number of types of aggression, child aggression, other things like that. And when I see these things, like I say, the majority, probably 95%, if not more, at the root, we can find fear, anxiety, insecurity, things like that. So, there is a small percentage, and to be honest, I don't see these dogs too much. They don't exist too much, too often. They're dogs that get put down quite frequently, things like that, and so their genes don't tend to spread very well. But I'm referring to dogs who are not fearful when they're aggressive. Their aggression comes from this place of I just want to fight, I want to kill, I want to battle, I want to hurt, and they're not, it's not coming from a place of fear, it's coming from this, this place of I want to dominate and battle. And again, that's pretty rare, and so not to shove that under the rug, but I do want to talk about what I see far more often, which is this aggression that comes from a place of fear. And so the question is, where does fear come from? Because again, I want to dispel this notion that, dogs are only bad if, or dogs are only aggressive if they've been trained to, or if they've been abused, or things like that. So fear tends to come from nature, nurture, or genes and upbringing, as I usually say. And so genetics are what they are. When you're born, you have certain DNA, and your genetics determine certain things about you. To a degree, your genetics will determine how tall you are. Now, again, the environment or the upbringing or nurture has something to do with that. If you don't get good nutrition, you'll probably be shorter. If you get great nutrition, you'll probably be taller. But at the end of the day, there's still that genetic component that, maybe you were supposed to be 6 feet tall with great nutrition, but you only ended up 5'11". You're not going to generally see, huge swings on something like that. But in any case, nature and nurture, genetics and upbringing are pretty important. So that's one component that I see people ignore all the time. I'll see people say, no, any dog will be fine if you just love it enough, if you just give it the right cookies. It's just not true. Genetics are a big, big deal. And so they're a big component of behavior. They're a big component of the physical aspect of a dog. They're a big component of the health aspect of a dog. And so, let me give you another example. German Shepherds. It's been a while since I read this study. In fact, more than a decade, I think, so don't quote me on the exact numbers. But German Shepherds have been bred very differently in Europe versus America. So in any German Shepherd that you see, being a police dog, military dog, protection dog, is going to come from European lines because they've bred them a certain way. And so it affects the behavior. You just can't get a police dog from American line German Shepherds. I'm sorry, you just can't. I shouldn't say just can't because that's a definitive, but I've never seen it or even heard of it. But also the health aspect. I mean, you look at American bred German Shepherds, again, it's been a while, so don't quote me, but I think that their hip dysplasia rates are something like 35 to 40% of these dogs get hip dysplasia. Whereas European bred dogs coming from Europe, it's like 2 or 3%. And so genetics determine a great deal of behavior. They determine a great deal of a physical, what we are, who we are. Now, upbringing is also very important. So when people say, oh, well, it's just all in how you raise them, I mean, they're partially true. How you raise your dog is important. And so if the dog has negative social experiences, if the dog has a lack of social experiences, if the dog has inappropriate social experiences, not enough, there's a number of things that can determine, okay, we have a dog who's genetically sound, who has a strong temperament, but he got beat up a bunch by other dogs when he was a puppy. That dog is far more likely to show aggression as it gets older. So even if the owner raised it well, raising it well would include not allowing it to get attacked, but over and over and over. But anyways, even if the owner did everything else well, and it had a genetically sound dog, that nurture, that upbringing could very well, play a big part in why, the dog has aggression issues. So, is there room for pointing a finger at yourself when your dog has aggression problems? Yes. And that goes for anyone, dog trainers, dog owners. There is room for that. Is there room for looking at the genetics of the dog and recognizing that the dog has its own